so much. So yeah, first I just want to thank International House and all those who took the time to put this together. Lisa, Sean, Neil, and everyone else, and of course the previous presenters. I've learned a lot today. I look forward to seeing the rest of the presentations and attending these in the future. So a quick note on my topic, and while I introduce it, I invite you to guess, based on my accent, where exactly I'm from in the United States. So I chose to title my talk, Teaching English as an American at a British School, because that's the particular linguistic challenge that I've personally faced. However, I intend also on offering some suggestions on how to handle the existence of such a rich tapestry of accents in the English language, and ultimately about what we can do to best assist the learner in achieving their goals. So I'm seeing East Coast and West Coast. And so Anthony, you're more correct. Northeast West, good guess. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, which is relatively close to Washington, D.C. So first, just a little bit about my own experience. When I first arrived to Ecuador at the beginning of 2014, like many Americans, I honestly wasn't particularly well traveled. And my CELTA course in Montañita was my first experience really discussing the English language with a majority of non-Americans. This was after a lifetime of being an avid reader and writer and English speaker, and having majored in English at university and such. So I felt I had a pretty firm grasp of the language. However, during the second week of the course, another trainee, a British woman who remains a good friend of mine, told me during feedback that my pronunciation that I had just taught was wrong. Of course, I knew that teaching abroad there would be differences, different accents, sometimes different phrasal verbs or vocabulary, and even common collocations aren't always exactly the same. But I didn't consider that I would be told that my English was wrong. So my good friend graciously explained to me that received pronunciation is the preferred pronunciation to teach, and that American English simply shouldn't be taught. Our trainer came in to break up this little fight, and this was the first time in my career that someone suggested that a teacher should actually just teach their own English whenever it's possible. And realistically, it's difficult to expect someone to do much else. One can only really teach their own English. So when our different pronunciations are discussed, references are often made to RP and GA, or General American. RP can be heard by listening to British news, and the same could be said with General American and watching American news. But does anyone really go around talking like a newscaster anyway? As English teachers, sometimes we do, but in real life, no, not really. And besides, there's, as I see it being pointed out in the chat, there's dozens of different types of accents, hundreds, even just within the UK and the US, not to mention the many other countries in the world where English is the native language, or the large variety of accents that students may encounter when speaking to other non-native speakers with English as their common but not first language. So which English do I teach? What do I do? Well, as always, it depends on the needs of the learner. My first job was at an institute managed by Americans with American textbooks and an American DOS, so the issue simply didn't come up. However, it did come up at my second job, as IH Quito is still / was previously known as the British School of Language. And as soon as I got a good look at Cambridge Press's definitively English face-to-face series, from which I would be teaching general English classes, I knew that I would be in for some extra planning. Because ultimately, if you're in a situation where you need to make sure you're teaching in English besides your own, then you need to take the time to thoroughly ensure that you understand. Do any of you know of any non-pronunciation differences and how English speakers from different countries use the language that has come up in your classroom? And so while you're typing that up, I'll offer some of my own examples. The most common one is the word biscuit. And the US, a biscuit is a delicious, soft, flaky type of buttery bread, whereas British biscuits, of course, are hard and dry, and we Americans would generally call them cookies. Another is I exercise on weekends, is what I would say. My understanding is that others may say I do exercise at weekends. Let's see. I'm not seeing any real suggestions coming up here. Anything else? The present perfect as used in real life. Just fag is certainly a notable one. Okay, cool, thank you. So regarding pronunciation, I've taken the advice of Adrian Underhill, as has been posted on onestopenglish.com. He also suggests, in addition to my self trainer, that whenever possible, one teach their own pronunciation. He says that although at one point RP was the preferred English to teach, it should now be seen mainly as a point of reference. Ultimately, of course, you need to do what's best for the students, depending on their needs. You need to make sure that they feel comfortable with a variety of options. My slides aren't coming up here. Weird. There we go. Sorry. So ultimately, you need to do what's best for the students depending on their needs. You need to make sure they feel comfortable with a variety of pronunciation, but not to the point that it's a distraction. He proposes a strategy of inviting students to be playful and test out types of the goal here is that the more you let people play with language, the more that particular lexical terms will be reinforced. And in experimenting with these different common forms of pronunciation, the hope is that they'll be able to better understand when listening to a variety of pronunciations. This can, of course, complicate teaching, but the English language is complicated. And depending on the needs of the learner, they may need to interact in English with people who come from a variety of backgrounds, with a variety of pronunciations, and they should be prepared to do so. This has been important in my general English classes here at IELTS because my students interact with a wide range of accents, tourists, workplaces. A notable class I've had was an in-company class for a worldwide German distributor that used English as their company-wide language. And therefore, really what they needed was to better understand the accent of German, which we did via authentic material, anything that I was able to find where the German accent is clear but present. However, that's sort of the perfect situation where you're just teaching general English classes. My next challenge was teaching the IELTS, definitively British exam. And in the case of teaching these quick, intense exam preparation courses, what's really best for the learner is for them to pass the test. And the IELTS paper always has a wide variety of accents. This variety does include the American accent. However, here in Ecuador, my students most certainly don't need any extra practice understanding the American accent. People from the United States are the most common tourists. Most of my students learn much of the English that they bring to the classroom through listening to American music, interacting with these American tourists, watching American TV shows and movies, etc. Basically, sort of, as people on IH Buenos Aires and other South American and other American locations might know, in North, South, and Central America, GA is sort of oftentimes the common. So for these classes, I needed to make sure that I exposed students to accents besides mine as much as possible. And the easiest way to do this is by using past speakers, many of which are available to us. And they always include a wide variety of accents. When a teacher has a student take a mock exam, which we often do, sorry, there we go, which we often do in class, I suggest that afterwards, instead of just having students through the script to find the landmarks and distractors, that the students listen to the audio again with the script in front of them. In my experience, it can be be a little bit boring for students, so you have to break it up into chunks. But it seems that doing so has the effect over time of making students feel more comfortable with all important test-taking techniques. Often my students will have trouble with specific accents, the Australian one being the most common, simply because they'll have had the least amount of exposure to this particular accent. In this case, we just can't spend the amount of time that is really necessary for the students to be exposed to this accent, which they may not be exposed to naturally. In that case, they really need some additional practice outside of class. It's essential. They need to listen and watch authentic representations of the accent they're having a problem with, using available media such as online news, podcasts, etc. These technologies are really transforming the classroom and the way learners learn outside of the classroom. That's a talk for another day. So what is one to do ultimately? Well, English is a multicultural language with a variety of subjectively correct interpretations. And this can present a challenge for teachers who must teach a different English than the one with which they've been trained or the one with which they've been raised. But ultimately, it depends on the learner's needs and the reason that they're in the classroom in the first place. But what about on the day of the test? I teach at a face-to-face quite often. The thing is, if you've taught multiple forms of English, if your English differs from the one that the textbook has, then really you should be accepting this as correct. Centered with ER or RE, for example. However, I do think it should be emphasized to students that they should be as consistent as possible with the English that they use in real life for purposes of fluency. In my case, all of my students have a relatively American accent when they come to the classroom. They use American vocabulary, and in situations where I'm able to, or it's best for the student, I don't discourage that because that's the group of people they'll most often be interacting with. So that's it for me today. I'm seeing a lot of really good comments, and thanks so much, or in British English, cheers. Need exposure.
Thanks very much for that.